Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome for the last session of the opening day of thematic sessions. So this is track 3, which is the inclusion. I would say the most important because we talk about the community engagement. I'm not saying that the others are not important, but this is the most important. Don't tell this to the other speakers and the moderators. The second session of thematic track 2 is out of the 4 subsessions. This is more about the planning and how do we engage the community in the energy sector planning, which is at the grassroots level. The smaller solutions, smaller financing mechanisms, and most importantly, how the community benefits out of this. But I won't talk that much about this because we have our moderator as well as the esteemed panelists to talk about it. Because of that, without further ado, let me introduce the moderator for session 3.2. The moderator for this session is Sonda Kim, one of our colleagues from the Asian Development Bank. He's a principal energy specialist working under the Central West Energy Department. He has about more than 20 years of experience in the energy sector across multiple facets, including power generation, transmission, distribution, and the sector reforms. Sondak, his bio is very, very long. I won't go through it. You can see it on the app. But in the recent years, most importantly, he has also been actively exploring emerging cross-sectoral initiatives related to critical minerals, circular economy, and the broader energy transition value chain. He holds a master's degree in engineering from the Stanford University from the United States, as well as a bachelor's degree in engineering from Korea University. Please put your hands together to welcome Sonda Kim, the moderator for session 3.2.
Right, good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Singda Kim, the Principal Energy Specialist at Asian Development Bank. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you to session 3.2, Community-Centered Energy Planning. To begin with, I have a few housekeeping the points. We have an exciting program out of us today, and to allow sufficient time for the panel discussions and Q&A sessions, I'd like to kindly ask our guest speakers to be mindful on the time allocated for your presentations. For our audience and participants, we will reserve the questions to until the designated Q&A sessions. In case you have any burning the question coming across your mind, please, you can use this the application, the Hova web, to submit your questions. So we'll do our best to incorporate, address as many questions we can during the sessions. With that, let us turn to today's topic. As energy professionals, we spend a lot of our time in discussing generation capacity, transmission grid, distribution network, probably renewable energy, or most recently, battery energy storage system, and et cetera, et cetera. But yet, many energy projects they ultimately succeed or fail, not because of the technology itself, but because of people. So communities are often the first to experience both the benefits and the impacts of the energy project. They are the consumers and landowners, the workers, and also the taxpayers and citizens who live with the consequences of the decision we make. Historically, the community engagement was often regarded as a compliance requirement. So a consultation meeting would be organized, comments would be collected, and the project would move forward. But increasingly, however, the governments, utilities, and development institutions like ADB are recognizing the meaningful participation is not simply about informing communities. It is about creating opportunities for communities to shape outcomes and influence decisions. So today's session explores that journey. We will first begin by examining practical frameworks for public participation. And we will then look at how the participation can be institutionalized through governance and accountability mechanisms. We will discuss the role of communication trust building. Finally, we will challenge ourselves to think about how communities can move beyond participation and exercise meaningful influence in energy transitions. To begin, I'm pleased to introduce our first speaker, Natalie Kauf from the International Energy Agency, or the IEA. Natalie has been leading work on public participation and stakeholder engagement in energy transitions across Southeast Asia. Today, she will introduce IEA's new toolkit for public participation in energy planning, which provides practical the guidance and lessons learned from extensive consultation across the region. Natalie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you for the lovely introduction. My name is Natalie Kauf, and I'm from the International Energy Agency. So we've been doing some recent work on this topic, which is why I was grateful to see that we had a session that I could speak to you about this topic. Even though our report won't be published until July 2026, I'll give you a sneak peek on some of what we've looked at. So energy policies and programs have wide-reaching impacts, as we've heard from the moderator today, across society. And when we empower communities to be able to shape energy planning, we can ensure that the policies and projects that we're developing can impact them and are designed to reflect their needs and priorities. Early stage, transparent co-development can build trust, reduce project risks, and turn energy projects into drivers of local development. We often don't see engagement being seen as a positive in terms of reducing the project risk, but it's an important part of project development that we want to make sure is seen here. We know that previous IEA analysis that we did in 2024 found that stakeholder engagement models that go beyond consultation to engage communities as active participants and beneficiaries in the design can have the most positive impacts on energy infrastructure. And for our upcoming toolkit, we did quite a bit of work. We built on 37 case studies from over 20 countries to really offer a practical menu to policymakers and project designers to be able to see which options might be the best fit for them. This toolkit will come out in a month and it'll be available on the IEA website, but you can also contact me later if you want to know about it. And for this, we conducted 25 individual consultations, 3 virtual workshops, and brought together over 150 participants from across Southeast Asia, including indigenous peoples groups, civil society, government ministries, and different agencies, multilateral organizations, multilateral development banks, labor and development stakeholders. So here we see that there's 7 key considerations that we wanted to discuss that are key for public participation in energy planning. So we'll set the stage here with possibly the most important, which is early and continuous engagement across the energy project life cycle, which helps to build public trust in the participation process. So we're not just engaging at one point, we're engaging all the way along, and that makes sure that we have much more robust engagement. We need to make sure that we're dedicating adequate time and resources to be able to implement the public participation meaningfully across the energy life cycle as well. And then accessibility, making sure that in terms of the linguistic accessibility, the financial accessibility, other kinds of cultural requirements, this will allow for broader participation, especially from the least privileged communities that you're trying to engage with. Education and capacity building is when we found is often lacking in public participation, but this can help to prepare stakeholders, especially in complex issues like energy sector projects. These can be, as energy specialists, something that we may take for granted, but it's important for communities to be able to understand the projects, understand what's at stake, and providing upfront some education and capacity building to the communities can help to address those information gaps. Safety and privacy can be essential, especially for marginalized communities, to ensure that you're fostering trust in energy-related participation processes. Also, transparency on the scope, the limitations, what are your expectations from the consultation process, what is reasonable and what is not, what kind of feedback would you be willing to take into account, and how might that be able to affect the process. This can help to foster trust and build credibility while also managing expectations. And then this leads to the final part, which links quite well to that transparency point, which is linking the feedback to the tangible outcomes from the participation. And this can help to improve public participation and improve trust, but also make sure that in the future, when you're trying to engage, the community does know that the time that they're giving to this process is actually going to have an impact and what kind of impact it can have. So here we'll look at a few examples from the toolkit. We have 4 different types of public participation. So I'll have one example from each, a couple from this region. So the first type is co-creation and shared decision-making. And here we have an example from ASEAN, where in March 2026, the ASEAN Center for Energy hosted a 2-day regional co-design workshop in Jakarta for the ASEAN Clean Manufacturing Strategy Roadmap and Energy Efficiency Guidelines for Eco-Industrial Parks. That's a mouthful. And so this brought together government officials, industry representatives, and development partners to jointly identify the priorities of the roadmap and also discuss implementation challenges and allow them to shape the recommendations. We also have an example of benefit sharing. This can be important for energy projects where there's a lot of opportunities for benefit sharing. In Malaysia, we have an example where Create Borneo, founded by the indigenous-led organization Tonibung, has supported installation of over 45 community-managed renewable energy mini-grids. So this model combines local ownership with community participation in planning and operation, as well as technical training and long-term capacity building. We then have a couple other examples from outside the region. Stakeholder mapping and consultation. That's more traditionally what we think about when we think about public participation. Here we have an example from Canada, my home country, where there's quite a lot of Indigenous engagement in project planning, especially in the energy and natural resource sector. And the Canadian federal government has an Indigenous advisory and monitoring committees which were established to strengthen Indigenous participation in the oversight of large energy projects. And here together, the Indigenous representatives and government regulators work together to review project implementation, monitor the environmental and safety performance, identify community concerns, and then provide ongoing dialogue throughout the project life cycle. And that last point of throughout the project life cycle is one that we wanted to make sure was comes through. Then we have another example from Colombia, the opposite side of the world from here, but a useful example. And that one's looking at information and transparency. So providing the information to the communities so that they can have a larger impact on the participation process. And here they have an interactive mapping and public forum platform, which looks at onshore wind on Indigenous lands. And this combines accessible project information for the communities, geospatial mapping, and public discussion spaces to enable communities to be more informed while being able to address project impacts. And finally, as I see the clock is ticking here, I wanted to draw your attention to a couple of the pieces of work that we're doing. So the IEA has been working on what we're calling people-centered clean energy transitions, ramping up our work on this. And here we have 2 reports. And the Southeast Asia Indicators Handbook for Just and Inclusive Energy Transitions was published in October. And this builds on the G20 principles for just and inclusive energy transitions. It's a practical resource to help governments and stakeholders identify indicators they can use, track progress, and assess policy effectiveness rather than prescribing just one fixed framework, it looks at adaptable options for different national circumstances. And so that one, you can scan the QR code, and then coming soon in July, we'll have the toolkit that I had mentioned today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Natalie, for giving us a chance to give a look at the toolkit to be published in July. Much appreciated. I mean, the key takeaways from a presentation is that there's meaningful participation requires quite a deliberate process, resources, and also the institutional commitment. While the toolkit provides the framework, our next speaker will show us what community-centered planning looks like in practice. Our next speaker is Shatni Pandey from the Practical Action. Shatni specialized in gender equality, disability, and social inclusion, and she has been working at the intersection of the community development and clean energy transitions. Today, she will share a practical example of how community governance and accountability mechanisms can be embedded into industrial decarbonization projects in Nepal. Over to you, Shatni.
Thank you so much. Namaste everyone, I'm Chandni Pandey, working as GEST specialist for the GRIPS 2 project in Nepal. Today I'm here to challenge the traditional factory fence mentality. We are proving that an industrial energy transition is only as resilient as the community governance that supports it. Our project is not just a technical pilot, it is a blueprint for inclusion by influence. We are moving beyond simple consultation to institutionalized co-planning, and nothing for them without them is our strongest technical and social mindset or milestone. Let's look at the macro paradox. Nepal claims a 99% renewable grid, yet our industries are trapped in diesel deadlock, losing $250 million annually to fuel the expenses. This growth is literally written in diesel smoke. But the cost isn't just financial. In our industrial corridors, air pollution is 7 times higher than WHO limits. Historically, these transitions have been socially blind, ignoring the women, people with disabilities, marginalized, who bear the environmental cost but reap zero rewards. GRIPS 2 is designed to open doors that were previously locked. We are doing this by 2 means: shifting the energy through decarbonization, the opportunity, clean and reliable energy transition in energy-intensive industries. What is GRIPS 2? GRIPS 2 is funded through the A2D facility, which is managed by UNIDO with funding from UK government. Then we bring the innovation, 924 kilowatt solar PV with 2 megawatt, 4 megawatt hour battery storage, AI-enabled micro-management system for real-time optimization, and the key is the GEST and environment and social safeguard are integrated from design through implementation across every phase of the project. We are not just replacing diesel with solar. We are replacing a socially blind transition with a just win. The second shift is we are shifting the center to the zone of influence, which was historically ignored by heavy industries in Nepal, and I'm sure that applies to many industries in South Asia or Asia. So what we did, we redefined the boundary. Those affected by decisions should have a say in the decision-making process. So we moved beyond the factory fence to the zone of influence through participatory planning. So what was the methodology that we applied? We conducted a rigorous gender baseline, capacity need assessment, and gender auditing involving 62 deep dive consultations with community members through KII and FGD, and we reached to 17 local institutions, including local government, because we believed in sustainability. So what does it do? So the community concerns were not just for clean energy, but for management of industrial externalities, smoke, noise, and economic agency and agricultural resilience. So what we did different is we listened before designing. So what our gender baseline revealed is the reality check of the baseline is that the literacy gap. There is the literacy gap of not the traditional literacy gap, but the gender literacy gap. So most of the organization and the person we reached, they lack the foundational JETC awareness within industrial workforce and the community institutions. The infrastructure voids that limited the people with disabilities with separate toilets to menstrual hygiene facilities in the industrial site. The time poverty is the key because the women are engaged in unpaid work with heavy domestic workload that is limiting them in the participation, the policy void, the systemic exclusion, and the lack of economic agency. So the strategic outcome of this baseline is the social license to operate. These findings directly drive the community industry dialogue platform, ensuring the technical design solves community prioritized externalities and economic agency. So through the baseline, community need assessment, and gender audit, we developed the deliberate gender action plan. So our gender action plan is not a top-down document. It is a co-created social blueprint. Technical innovation alone cannot solve the gaps we identified. It requires deliberate social engineering. So what we did is we addressed the time poverty to ensure women can actually access our 50% quota in training, technical trainings. We launched allies in inclusion dialogues. We target male factory workers and husbands to redistribute household care burdens, effectively unlocking women's time so they can participate in the green economy. Why? Because you cannot achieve a 50% training of quota if a woman is too time poor to attend. Second is the institutionalizing workplace dignity. We responded to the community's demand for safety by retrofitting the site with separate toilets and safety lighting while updating OHS manuals. Agency-based empowerment, we move beyond providing jobs to equipping people with rights. This means training marginalized women, Tharu, Dalit, and people with disability participants, not just in technical operation and management, but in leadership and negotiation skills so that they can hold decision-making power by shifting power dynamics in their house. Inclusive economic agency, we support diverse and inclusive income-generating activities paired with mandatory financial and digital literacy training. By linking these social interventions to our technology, we ensure that the transition doesn't just watch women, it empowers them to lead through community-centered design, institutionalizing nothing for them without them. So how we institutionalize governance, the mechanism established a formal community industry dialogue platform establishing JETC and ESS advisory committee. That is a high-level committee with 45% of female, people with disabilities, and marginalized representations. They move from passive receivers to active achievers. The platform institutionalizes participatory planning, enable local stakeholders to co-design energy-linked priorities, social license to operate, transforming communities, voices of industrial externalities into partners in the energy transition, reducing operational and delivery risk through community ownership. So what is our JETC strategy? It is track 1 is targeted for the women and marginalized groups. Track 2 is systemic, to remove the systemic barriers to policies and another policy frameworks, and the intersectionality, that explicit inclusion of Tharu, marginalized, Dalit, Madhesi, and people with disability voices to ensure the transition leaves no one behind. So what is the GRIPS 2 accountability framework? The digital grievance redress mechanism, sex-segregated MIS, de-risking capital, inclusive procurement. So what is the just transition ROI of our JETSI approach or of our groups too is a de-risked capital. Projects with robust social safeguards are more likely to attract blended finance, reduce turnover, safer, cleaner workplaces lead to higher productivity due to social license to operate. Policy leverage, GRIPS 2 is directly informing Nepal's 10 megawatt national base initiative through its 2 megawatt project site. Financial leverage, we have already been able to leverage USD 4.5 million mobilized in private capital for expansion, scalable blueprint, proven model for replication across Asia. We have been able to establish that building a blueprint for smarter, greener, and inclusive industrial decarbonization. Last but not the least, the GRIPS 2 Lighthouse demonstration model proves inclusion as a commercial enabler. So I would like you to join hands with us by scanning the QR provided in this journey. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shartni. The audience may not be able to look at the timer here, but it reaches the closing, that a crazy blinking that drives the speakers with nerves. Thank you again. Your presentation reminds us that meaningful participation requires structures, institutions, and also the accountability mechanism. But even the strongest governance arrangements depend on trust, communication, and the ability to connect technical energy transitions with people's lived experiences. Our third speaker is Biena Magdiban from the Climate Tracker Asia. The Biena's work focuses on climate communication, youth engagement, and strengthening public understanding of climate and energy issues. Today, she will explore how the communication and storytelling can help bridge the gap between technical energy planning and the communities these projects are intended to serve. Over to you.
Magandang hapon po. I'm Biena Magbitan, Executive Director of Climate Tracker Asia. We work with journalists, content creators, students, advocates, communities across Asia to make climate and energy stories more accurate, accessible, and useful. Today, I want to talk about the gap that we keep seeing in the region, the gap between how energy transition is planned, how it is reported, and how communities actually understand it. So one of the biggest challenge that we actually saw in Southeast Asia is that energy and climate are often covered in separate worlds. Business reporters usually cover energy through prices, investments, utilities, and power supply, while environment reporters cover climate through impacts, disasters, emissions, ecosystems, and communities. But the energy transition sits in right in the middle of those two. It's about economics, but also justice. It's about infrastructure, but also health. It's about climate targets, but also about your electricity bills. So we really think that communities do not experience these issues separately. They live with all of them all at once. So we saw in all of our interviews and our community experience that this is not only a media problem, it's also a language problem in Asia. Many energy transition conversations happen in English, we all know that. But Asia is multilingual, it's diverse and also unequal. And even for English speakers, energy language can be hard to follow. It is often drowning in jargon like an alphabet soup. So terms like base load, power purchase agreements, grid flexibility, LNG, those really matter, but if they stay trapped in technical rooms like this, communities are often left out of the decisions that affect their land, their jobs, health, safety, and again, electricity bills. So the question for us become, how can we actually make energy transition stories clearer without making them shallow? Because we don't want to, for lack of a better term, dumb it down for the communities. And the communication gap is not a media problem alone. We really believe that it is an energy planning problem. So we started with research because we want to be armed with something that we can show to the communities and our partners with. And a few years ago, we at Climate Tracker studied how coal and renewable energy were being reported in 5 Southeast Asian countries: Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, the Philippines, and Vietnam. And that study actually involved 99 journalists and editors, and we analyzed more than like nearly 3,000 stories across 8 mainstream media languages. And one pattern really became clear: that the energy was often treated mainly as an economic development story. A lot of the reporters and journalists you will see outside are actually economic and business reporters. But and that is actually understandable. I was too an energy and business reporter. That's why I know all these things. But we all know that energy is about investment, infrastructure, electricity supply, and national development. But when energy is actually framed only that way, other parts of the story disappear. Environmental impacts become secondary, and human impact stories become occasional sidebars. And community quotes actually come through the end, like they, or if not at all. So we did not start by assuming that the journalists were failing. We started by asking what made energy reporting difficult in the first place, and these three problems keep showing up. First, business and government sources dominated, and not just because the reporters are quoting from narrow pool, but one of the reasons is a lot of reporters don't actually have access to experts and community experts for that matter, because a lot of the community experts are not in the city. Second, local citizens were really underreported as well because communities were often missing from stories about energy decisions that are affecting their lives. And third, reporters really need more support. Many journalists wanted to cover energy better but lack tools. They also lack resources, time, and editorial backing. Not a lot of editors actually understand that the energy story must be communicated not just in a business angle but also in a community angle. So for us, the struggle was clear. If the media ecosystem does not have the tools to explain the energy transition well, then the communities will actually struggle to participate in it. So here's what we built in response. These are just some of the things that we did. We actually have a lot of projects that are connected not just in energy but climate, but in energy focus, we built an energy reporting guide specifically for Southeast Asia, and we translated it not just in English but also in Bahasa Malaysia, Bahasa Indonesia, and also in other languages to help journalists understand energy terms, because we realized that not a lot of words have local translation, but we had to kind of like find how to contextualize it to local reporters. We also tried to help journalists find better sources and to explain the links between energy and climate change. We also trained a lot of reporters and editors because, as I've said a while ago, they need to be hand in hand so they both appreciate the story in energy, just energy transition. We trained content creators because many people now learn about climate and energy through short videos, explainers, and social media. We also ran a lot of storytelling boot camps, for advocates, students, and communities, not just journalists. We really wanted to focus on empowering the communities to tell their own stories, because public understanding for us does not only happen in newsrooms. And we also supported story grants, not just in the national level, but also cross-border collaborations. We have a lot of energy stories that links Thailand, Philippines, and Indonesia, Malaysia, and Indonesia, for example, because we really believe that climate impacts do not just stop at national borders. For us, the work was not just about producing more energy story, but about building a stronger ecosystem of support around energy transition. So this is the key point that I really want to leave this room. If you can take away something from me, is that good storytelling for us really strengthens energy planning. Too often, communication comes after major decisions have already been made. So the technical design is finished, the financing is arranged, the policy is written, then someone says, okay, now let's explain this to the public, right? But by then, it might already be too late. So good storytelling helps translate technical plans into live realities for those who have lived experience that are going through the transition. It helps surface risk early and concerns early. It helps build the trust before the conflict begins. It helps counter misinformation, and it actually creates feedback loops between the communities and the decision makers. That's why we believe that for community-centered energy planning, storytelling should not be the final communications layer. So what does this mean for energy planners in the room and development institutions and clean energy partners? For us, these are just some steps that you can take. So first, bring communicators earlier, not after the decisions are made, but while plans are being shaped. Second, fund local language explainers. If energy transition only makes sense in English or only makes sense to experts, it will not be truly inclusive, especially here in Southeast Asia. Third, treat trust as part of the implementation. Trust is not a soft outcome. It affects whether people understand a project, participate, and raise concerns early. And finally, really believe in this. This is my life's passion, that every reporter should really be a climate reporter. That does not mean every journalist needs to become a climate scientist, because we really can't be that. It means that every beat now intersects with climate. So business, health, education, local government, community reporters all have a role in explaining the transition. And public understanding is not the aftercare. It is and should be the architecture. And if people are expected to live with the transition, they should not meet it for the first time in a press release. My time is up, but finally, I want to share with you a project that we're doing. It's a mobile app for climate knowledge. If you want, it's in beta release. If you want to be part of our early beta list, please sign up. And yeah, thank you. I want to leave you with this. The clean energy transition will not be as inclusive as the stories people can understand, question, and shape. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you so much, Piana, for the very clear message that the energy transition also needs public understanding. And also the creating the trust and understanding will only make the engagement possible. Thank you again. Our final speaker will take us one step further. Our final speaker is Sadaf Haider. Sadaf works at the intersection of the climate justice, community engagement, and grassroots energy transitions. Her presentation challenges us to think beyond participation and asks what it truly means for communities to have influence and ownership in energy decision making. Sadaf, please welcome.
Good afternoon, Assalamualaikum, and magandang hapon po, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I'm joining you today from Bangladesh. I'm going to start my presentation with a very simple question. Why do some energy systems continue creating value long after installation while others struggle to do so, despite of being access to the same technology? I'll explore this answer through my presentation through decentralized solar intervention case studies in rural Bangladesh. Let's start with the core challenge. When we talk about energy access, we often focus on the first panel, which is access. We deliver the infrastructure, solar panels are installed, and electricity reaches the site. But what actually happens after the light comes on? The real question is whether communities have a role in shaping how these spaces are used and sustained over time. And that's when governance starts to matter, because the last mile challenge is about moving from access to meaningful use and ultimately to shared governance. And that's really the idea behind this presentation, that inclusion should not be treated as an afterthought. It should be part of how last mile energy systems are designed and sustained from the very beginning. The central idea behind this work is moving from participation as consultation to participation as shared power. Too often, communities are asked for opinions, but they have very little influence over how systems actually function in practice. When participation deepens, communities begin shaping how energy-enabled spaces are used, adapted, and sustained over time. And when that happens, ownership begins to change. Energy systems become more socially embedded, and we start seeing broader outcomes in education, livelihood, inclusion, and resilience. So participation becomes more meaningful when communities have a genuine role in shaping what happens after energy access is provided. To explore these ideas in practice, let me briefly introduce the case studies. These interventions are located in rural Netrokona, a hard-to-reach area in Bangladesh. The first two sites were primary schools serving students from grade 1 to 4, and the second school was a girls-only school. Here I would like to mention that the students were taught in a shared learning environment, meaning they did not have separate classrooms for individual grades. And the third one was a vocational training center for local women. What's interesting was that the vocational training center was not originally a separate facility. The community began using space within the girls' school after school hours for sewing and tailoring training, creating opportunities for skills development and income generation. The most visible impacts were in education and participation, as we can see from the slides. Perhaps the most significant change was in participation. Female participation in extracurricular activities grew from just 7 girls in 2021 to 32 in 2025, more than 4-fold increase. And in the second school, the extracurricular participation grew from virtually none to 16 students over the same period. What this suggests is that energy access did much more than provide electricity. It expanded opportunities for participation, learning, and engagement beyond regular classroom hours. And importantly, many of these were experienced by girls who often face greater barriers in participation in terms of rural contexts. So the story here is not simply about energy access, it's about expanding participation in education and school activities, especially for girls. So this is where we begin to see what shared power looks like in practice. As participation increased, expanded, the vocational training center grew from a small initiative into a larger community resource, reaching 70 women by 2025. At the same time, average monthly income increased from around 3,500 to 9,000 Bangladeshi taka per month as participants developed more specialized skills. But what I find most interesting is how this translates to adaptive governance. As demand increased, women trainees introduced flexible 3-month-long and 6-month-long training schedules to accommodate more participants in the same limited space. This was not externally designed, it emerged locally. That's one of the clearest examples of shared power in this case. We saw something similar during flood-related grid outages when the solar-powered schools began functioning as community shelters. Nighttime sensor data later showed that community members were actively using these spaces during climate disruptions. These examples suggest that communities were doing much more than participating. They were actively shaping how the spaces functioned and the value they created. And that's an important point. The long-term value of these systems came not only from providing electricity, but from enabling communities to adapt and expand the use of these spaces in ways that reflected local needs and priorities. This section brings a presentation together into a proposed institutional co-creation framework for last-mile energy systems. The central idea is simple. Inclusion should not be treated as a one-time consultation service. It should be embedded throughout the life cycle of an energy intervention. The journey starts with communities helping define local needs and priorities. As energy access creates new opportunities, communities begin shaping how energy-enabled spaces are actually used. And as participation deepens, new opportunities and stronger institutions begin to emerge. Over time, this can translate into stronger ownership, resilience, continuity, and broader social value. And all this also depends on enabling conditions such as the participation of women and girls, trusted local institutions, community trust, and local stewardship. The central message is that communities should not be seen as beneficiaries of energy systems. They should be recognized as co-creators of how the systems are used, adapted, and sustained. And when participation evolves into shared power, energy systems become more inclusive, more resilient, and more sustainable over the long term. Taken together, these experiences highlight an important lesson for community-centered energy planning. Energy access creates opportunities, but community participation determines how much value emerges from them. The case studies from Netrokona suggest that the greatest value emerged when communities were not simply consulted, but had meaningful role in shaping how energy-enabled spaces were used, adapted, and sustained over time. Looking at the three elements on the slide, governance creates space for participation, inclusion ensures that diverse voices are part of the process, and performance is reflected in the broader outcomes that emerge over time. The central lesson is simple. Participation becomes meaningful when it evolves into shared power. And if we want secure and resilient last mile energy systems, we must share power in the last mile. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sadaf, for saving us some time. Wait, listening to all four presentations, I'm struck by a common thread. We began with the participation as a principle, and we explored governance structures that institutionalize participation. We discussed communication and trust as enabling conditions. And finally, we challenged ourselves to think about the participation not merely as an engagement, but as influence and shared decision making. So with that, I'd like to move on to the panel discussions. I'd like to invite our guest speakers to the podium, please. All right, we will have a panel discussions. I have a couple questions to ask on behalf of the audience. I have one question. Everyone agrees that the community participation is important, but meaningful participation still remains difficult to achieve. So in your view, what is the single biggest obstacles? May you start with the...
Thank you for the question. I think, in my opinion, the single biggest obstacle will be capacity gap. Communities might not have enough understanding of the system, decision-making processes, administrative processes, or day-to-day management requirements. So meaningful participation does mean that the community, they have a seat on the table, but they need to have the knowledge to contribute effectively.
I'll answer the question as a journalist. I've been in a lot of communities where, and I've seen them ask and sometimes even beg to be included in decisions that will actually eventually affect their lives. So, but too often what they get is token participation. So for me, one of the biggest obstacle that I see from having that experience of going to the communities is we treat the communities as ordinary people and not experts. We should shift that mindset to think that the communities that we are building this energy transition for are actually experts of their land. They know the place that they live in. They actually know what are the conditions of that place, and they too actually know the risks and the politics and the history and the people and the early warning signs that outsiders like energy planners might not be able to know.
Thank you for the question. So I think the biggest obstacle is power and time asymmetry. In industrial projects, the developer holds all the information and technical capacity or capital, while the community, especially women, hold the time poverty. So in our baseline, it showed that women were burdened by 6 to 8 hours of unpaid care work every day. So if you hold a consultation at 2 p.m. or 8 a.m. without addressing their domestic burden, we weren't inclusive. We are being performative rather. So meaningful participation only happens when we move from inclusion by invitation to inclusion by influence. which requires us to actively dismantle the structural barriers like time and information gaps that prevent people, especially women and marginalized communities, from showing up to the table as equals. Thank you.
Thank you. Quite a few good comments already. And I did list 7 key barriers in my presentation, but maybe gave away in the presentation that effective and meaningful participation goes from the design of the participation throughout the project lifecycle. And we've seen examples of where there's frustration that comes from not being sufficiently consulted, but also consultation fatigue. This can happen on the other side. And previously, when I worked in the Canadian government, this was something we heard from stakeholders. And that's sometimes that you've not engaged the correct stakeholders, you've not engaged them in the proper way, and sometimes the same stakeholders are being consulted each time for different energy projects, and without seeing much benefit to it. So making sure that it's properly designed, the stakeholder consultation, so that you've got the right people, they're engaged in the process, and then there's meaningful response from that.
Here are quite common the responses. For example, this capacity gap, and the communities are not really the expert, meaning that there should be more inclusive consultations and more targeted the consultations. As the follow-up question, actually many projects consult communities. Same as the ADB project, we always have this consultation process as part of the project preparations. But only fewer projects share decision-making power, actually. So where should we draw the line between the consultation and core decision-making? This could be a bit tricky questions, but I'd really like to hear from you guys. Probably start with you, Natalie, if you don't mind.
Sure. So in my presentation, I talked about 4 different types of consultation. And there we have, on the more hands-on side, we do have co-decision making and design, which is a much more involved process. We then also have co-benefit sharing. So this we've seen in a couple of the examples today. And then we've also had information sharing and consultation. So information sharing is the flow of information going from the energy policymakers or the project designers outwards, and then consultation, you can kind of see it as information coming to them from the communities. And these are all different, in my view, these are all different aspects of the consultation process, which would have their own space of when they'd be most appropriate. And that's why we were, when we're looking at this toolkit, what we wanted to do was to provide a menu of options that it may seem scary if you just say, you know, here's the option is perfection on, you want to make sure that you have co-decision making, and this doesn't seem feasible in all cases. But if you provide a menu of different options and how they might be able to work in different contexts, we're hoping that we're starting to make it feel more accessible and help bit by bit increase that participation.
The line is drawn at negotiable priorities. Consultation is often the social marketing of what is going to happen and where and when. Co-designing is making when the community has the power to co-design projects' socio-economic footprint. So in our GRIPS 2 project, our JETSI and ESS advisory committee, which is the combination of more than 45% of female, persons with disabilities and marginalized people, it doesn't just discuss the project, they co-negotiate the CSR pipeline with the industry, the environmental mitigation measures, and the local placement and the technical and the income generating activities that they want or demand from the industry. So this is how we draw the line between just mere consultation and the co-decision making framework or opportunities.
Yeah, I think for most of us who have sat through a stakeholder meeting, we all know that not all decisions can be made through a public consultation. So I think what's happening is the participation is becoming a mere comment box from the community, and I think we should draw the line in whether people can really influence outcomes and not just express concerns, because I think nothing can change after people speak. That is not co-decision making. And as a journalist, that for me is not co-decision making or not consultation, but mere documentation.
I would like to keep it simple, and I would draw the line on the type of decision being made. For energy systems, for technical and safety critical decisions, they should remain with the engineers and the implementing agencies. But for decisions which concern how these energy services are used, adapted, or governed, I would involve communities as co-decision makers.
Well, I'm actually dying to ask this question because this is quite related to my work. So development institutions like ADB often measure the physical outputs such as megawatt installed, kilometers of transmission lines and distribution line built, or household number of households connected. But should we also measure the participation or inclusion or trust and community ownership? I mean, if we had to do, then how do we do that? Please share your thoughts on this. Probably we'll start with you.
Yes, absolutely. Because the physical outputs, like you mentioned, they tell us whether infrastructure was delivered, but it doesn't tell us about the social or economic values we get out of them. Alongside technical indicators, we should definitely measure the outcomes, like you asked for, like participation, inclusion, etc. And this could be done through surveys, participation metrics like the percentage of women and girls participating, the percentage of marginalized communities participating, qualitative feedback, user engagement data, etc., that capture how communities interact with and benefit from the energy systems over time.
Yeah, I think I'd go back to my presentation a while ago and ask, I mean, these are really good discussions on inclusion and participation, but we should also go back to the start and ask, like, if this inclusion that we are talking about would actually measure who receive information, if they really understand it, and were they able to ask questions, were they really able to participate, or else it's gonna be just an attendance sheet, right? So, and so good indicator for me really is language access, especially here in Southeast Asia, because not everyone can really participate in the same level of, for example, not everyone can really talk in English fluently. And as someone who was also reported in the field, I also think that we should really look beyond the numbers of people who attended, because sometimes we see numbers in presentations that a lot of people attended this, and it's gonna be just another attendance sheet. But because a full room does not automatically mean it's good participation, so there are some indicators that we also have to measure for us to know that it's really a good community participation.
Absolutely. The megawatts tell us if the lights are on. Social KPIs tell us if the lights will stay on forever or not. So at GRIPS 2, we treat evidence as infrastructure. So we make sure through participation in leadership, not just the attendance, but the percentage of women and marginalized groups in office bearer position. So far, we have been able to reach 45% in our committees that we have formed for governance and accountability. Second, with grievance redress mechanism responsiveness, the speed and resolution rate of our digital grievance redress mechanism, a used and trusted community, trusted community, accessible GRM is the ultimate proxy for community trust. So the capital mobilization has allowed a lighthouse effect that we have already discussed in our presentation, that it tells us that we mobilized 4.5 million in private capital because investors saw inclusion as a measurable commercial enabler, reducing the social risk. So these are the three metrics that we measure how participation, inclusion, trust, and community ownership works for us. Thank you.
Thanks. And I had mentioned in my presentation again that we've done a report on indicators, and welcome everyone to take a look at this. But it's also a question of, not all of these indicators will be measurable. You can't measure trust as an indicator, but some of the outcomes that can be achieved by energy projects and their impacts on livelihoods, their impacts on different communities, some of that is not being measured in a lot of projects, and there are very feasible ways of doing that. And we've heard from some of the other speakers today on some of the impacts on communities, the impacts on their livelihoods and their skills development and their learning opportunities from having the lights on. And those are all really valid ways. But there's no universal rule. And if you're looking for advice for ADB, I don't know if I wouldn't be the best person to give you that advice, but it would be very different from one organization to another based on kind of the objective. So I think from today's speakers, we've also heard that there is no one way of doing participation, public participation either.
Thank you so much for the very insightful the comments. As a last question from my end, if you could change one thing about how government and utilities and even development institutions like IDB engage communities, what would it be? Maybe start with the Sadaf, if you're ready.
So I would institutionalize community co-creation, as my presentation title was. And I would do that by moving community engagement from a one-time consultation exercise to a continuous partnership throughout the entire project lifecycle. Too often, communities are only consulted during the project design, and engagement pretty much ends there. So instead, communities, they should have an ongoing role in planning, implementation, monitoring, and stewardship. And when that's going to happen, this will make the projects more trusted, more inclusive, and more sustainable over time.
Yeah, and this, my answer may be really self-serving, but I want to implore everyone to bring communicators in early, not when the project is already primed for ribbon cutting. We often see that a lot of mistrust begins with poor communication, and not sometimes and more often than not, communities are not really against projects, but they don't really understand what the projects are. That's why those poor communication lead to mistrust, and they are against being confused, excluded, or spoke about only when the decision is actually finally made. So, but I understand institutions and governments why they shy away from maybe they sometimes shy away by scrutiny, or because it can really be uncomfortable. But if in some questions from the community, and I've seen this, they can really be difficult and tough. But when everything becomes too controlled, people will definitely go up against it. And sometimes some projects become really too PR driven, and people don't really understand it as well. And some organizations are too afraid of criticisms that what I said a while ago, that participation just becomes an attendance sheet. So the circle of trust really becomes smaller. But if you want the communities to really trust the transition, if you want them to really participate in the transition, we have to give them information they can use and information they truly understand.
For me, I would mandate a social first sequencing. Currently, institutions design the technical hardware first and then find just expert like me to fix the social aspect. So I would like to change that sequence. We need to flip the script. The gender baseline and capacity need assessment should define the technical parameters. If the community prioritizes noise reduction, and safe transit for women, the technical design must include that from the very first day or day one. So we must stop treating the community as a risk to be managed and start treating them as the primary planner of the transition. I want to reiterate again, nothing for them without them would be the thing that I would like to change for the approach for the next project or the coming days.
Thanks. I think this is a great question, and I will play the devil's advocate on the opposite side, that the information that's needed is more on the people who are doing the participation design. And I really do think that it's something that can be learned. It's a skill. And when I think back to when I was a few years ago, young idealistic intern coming out of my studies, very keen to develop these co-design workshops. I learned on the ground, but a couple of years later, I had the opportunity to get real training and to really understand how to design properly these kinds of things, and to ensure the participation of communities. And there are people who are experts on this topic, some of them on the panel here today. But it's not always seen as a skill. It's not always seen as a technical skill that can be learned and should be learned by project implementers, by policymakers. And I think that's the first step, is making sure that the people who are doing this work know why it's important and know how to do it. And they are also given the opportunity to learn about the communities that they're working with and who are impacted. And so I think that would be, if you could just do one thing, it's provide that proper training and skills development to the people who are designing the energy policies and energy projects on how to properly engage.
Thank you so much for the very insightful the comments, especially the Shatney's comments on the changing the sequence of the project preparation. That really resonated in my mind, is whenever I develop or design a product, the length of the transmission lines and megawatt capacity comes first, and that's kind of the last thing to think. But I mean, that really brings me different perspectives, how design could be change it, right? We're actually quite good in terms of the managing our time, because we are reaching the end of the day. I believe they were all tired by now. So thank you again, all the panelists today. I really appreciate it. We learned a lot from these panel discussions, and look forward to communicating further with your colleagues. And with those reflections, I'd like to now open the floor to our audience. If you have any questions, please feel free to come out to the center of the hall and ask questions. I would appreciate if you briefly introduce yourself before you place any question. All right.
I'm Anil Chaudhary from Energy Efficiency Services from India. And this is not a question actually, this is basically a response to what we have learned in last 1 hour. That actually, that whenever something is planned, let's say I'm taking example of a solar cold room, which is very much required for the post-harvest loss management. And for energy efficiency side, that is the energy saving device, because it's using solar energy and it is energy efficient solar cold room. So if you will go to any farmer and say that it's use this because it will save energy, it will not make sense to them. So what is the story for them? Story for them that it will save your post-harvest loss management. So story for every user differs, and that is what has been brought out also. So actually the thing is that when we go for any kind of community development, any kind of energy planning, any kind of thing, then what the community is using, basically, that use case is very much important. And that has been very well iterated. I would have liked that everybody would have given some good examples in their in that slides, then it would have been more interesting. Well, it was all the time interesting, but by the maybe the paucity of time might have restricted them to give the examples. But I see that see the point that narration is very much important. Basically, that is what the thing is.
Thank you so much. Do anyone wants to? Was that? It was on the solar.
Kind of narration could have been given by. At that time, I was expecting some narration from you where it has affected, when it was not getting through the community, and what was narrated when it got through the community.
Sorry, I lost time. I actually was speaking over time, but I think one of the most important thing that storytellers or journalists can do that will help the communities in the energy planning is the journalists can actually ask the questions the communities don't really know how to ask. Like maybe they don't really know. Sometimes communities are just confused and they don't understand what's happening. So like and this is me not discounting the fact that because I already said a while ago that communities are experts too, but sometimes the framing of the questions, they can really bridge the gap between the community and also the energy planners. Some of the stories that we actually done in recent years has also shown that being able to have in our organization we also do a lot of host a lot of stakeholder meetings between advocates, the government and energy planners and also journalists. And what we saw is communicators and journalists actually really help in bridging the communication gap between the two. Not sometimes what we saw is scientists, experts, and the government are too afraid to talk to the communities because they are afraid of scrutiny. But communities sometimes get too overwhelmed and too intimidated by the experts. So if you have a communicator and a journalist, it becomes a neutral ground, and they can actually understand each other because the communities feel that the journalist is actually on their side and their ally, and as well as the government know that the journalist can actually transcend the trust between the two the two camps.
Thank you. Does that answer your comment? Yes, please.
I'm from Bangladesh. I'm Muzaffar Ahmed, Sustainable and Renewable Energy Authority Chairman in Bangladesh. I have one question to Sadaf. Sadaf, also you show in one slide, co-design, co-enable, co-use, co-immerse, and co-sustain. How you can integrate these 5 components in reality?
Okay, thank you for the question. So if you go back to my slide, I actually, these are basically processes, right? All the verbs that is used, co-design, co-emerge, that is what the community is basically doing, you know? And in my example, in my case studies, what happened is first the community, just if you look at the example of the vocational training center, so we gave solar electricity was provided in 2 schools. And then the community, when they saw that they have electricity beyond classroom hours, they decided to make the second school, which was the girls' school, into a vocational training center. So in that process, the community, they co-designed and they co-adapted, and they went through all the steps, all the pillars of the framework, and came to that solution.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have 2 questions from online. I think the first one is for Natalie. This is regarding the toolkit that you explained for us. So can we access the toolkit? If yes, and how? I like this question.
Great, that means I did my job well. So the answer is not yet. In July, we'll publish it, and it'll be available at our website, iea.org. And if not, you can come up and ask me for a card afterwards. I can give you my email and let you know when it's ready.
Thank you. We have one more question from online. This one is a bit the challenging to answer. This question is from Augustine. I'm not sure if you are present here. Otherwise, yes. Oh, yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, by the way. For community center energy planning to become a scalable reality, what structural changes must be made to decentralize grid governance, moving beyond superficial public consultations to grant local communities legal equity and direct grid interconnection rights? Sadaf, you ready to take? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So my presentation focuses less on legal ownership and more on community influence. The key lesson is that decentralization is not only about who owns the infrastructure, but also about who helps shape its use and long-term stewardship. Going forward, I believe we need stronger mechanisms for community representation, partnerships with local institutions, and policies that enable meaningful participation in decentralized energy planning. But on the precise mechanisms, I would defer to the regulatory specialists here. Thank you.
Shani, oh, yes.
I'll also answer from a communication standpoint. I think if we want community-centered participation in energy planning to become real, we have to decentralize not only infrastructure, but also knowledge, language and decision-making power. Of course, legal regulatory framework reform matters, but public literacy also matters. Communities need to understand who makes the decision, who benefits from them, what rights do they have, and whether they can intervene and what options are available to them.
I would also like to add something. In my presentation, we talked about the GRIPS 2 approach of governance, like establishing advisory committee with the local communities, more than 45% of their representation, to negotiate the local priorities, such as the noise or pollution or the industrial externalities, or also including the economic agency, and also the local placement or the employment rates or the employment opportunities in the new established industries. So another one would be the grievance redress mechanism. So it can be a digital accountability framework to understand or to build the community trust, where they can feel safe to report whatever they have been experiencing due to the new industries or the existing industries. And another would be capacity building of the local governance on gender responsive budgeting or gender audit, so that it can also be more inclusive and a sustainable way of doing the things right in the community to earn the community-centered energy planning.
Thanks. This was a challenging question. I will say that probably this is not the right panel for looking at legal grid interconnection rights. We might need some lawyers on the panel for that one. But I do think it differs by country. And so here, if I understand correctly, the question was about kind of that last mile connection and the equity of having the access to electricity. And here, what we've put forward is a lot of options for how to increase that connection in a sustainable and scalable way for different countries. But the legal rights of each community will vary by country. So I don't think there's, maybe I'm repeating myself here, but I don't think there is one answer to that question.
Thank you. Yes, please go ahead.
Hi, Talha Manzoor. I'm from the Lahore University of Management Sciences in Pakistan. So there was some talk about, so people who design these projects need to be trained to make their projects more community centered and seek this as a skill. And I do a lot of community engagement, and I also had to learn a lot of stuff on the ground. And uh, uh, even though I teach in a university, I don't find this stuff being taught as a focused discipline, or there are no specialized academic programs for this. Or so my question really is, if so for people who aspire to make their projects more community centered, where should they start to learn this stuff?
Maybe start with you, Natalie.
Happy to start on that. And so, in my own personal experience, I had on the ground training. I had formal training as an employee, and also during my studies, participatory programs and co-design was included as part of my master's program. I will say, though, that what I had found was, after trying to do some of these programs and noticing that it is a very complex topic, I then went and worked in the Canadian government, and I was offered the opportunity to learn. And this was something that's given to a lot of government employees. So each government has still a lot to work on in terms of developing these programs. But it was a huge opportunity. And I think this is something that we've shown when working with some other governments, was that having that be something that policymakers have access to as a training, and when they're designing policies to look at different aspects of communities. And some people will dismiss the training as something they just had to do, and maybe won't take it too seriously, but it is an opportunity. And so I think having those programs available to policymakers and making it part of a policymaker's training is a really important, really impactful step that can be taken by different governments if they want to. And as we're doing that, there's not just policymakers here. We're also talking about project implementation, and often it's not part of their training in school. But I think when we're advocating for what kind of things can be done to improve the consultations, we should be looking at making sure that people are properly trained. And once they are properly trained, and this could be a short training, or it could be something that they've gone in and done actual there are actual degrees where you're looking at where this is part of your degree. We need to make sure that people have it as it helps them to understand why it's important. And I think when people do discredit participation and engagement as being just a box checking exercise, I feel it's often that they actually haven't been given the time to learn how to do it properly and why it's important.
That's great. Just answer
Mm, I would just like to add that I too struggled at first when I aspired to work in this sector, but then I came across a course in Coursera. So you can look into the online courses to really hone your technical knowledge on what the community-centered planning is through human-centered design and analytical gender analytics or similar courses. So you can go and search some of the online courses, and as Natalia said, we can negotiate with the organizations or the government to prioritize these kind of trainings to technical persons as well, because social engineering is also one of the burning issues that we need to address in the heavy industries or other energy industries, I think so.
anyone to build on?
I would just like to add to that besides training communities, they should also have the awareness, because it depends from community to community. For instance, in my case studies, they did not really need any training because based on the rural context. So they need more awareness of the system, of the energy systems, maintenance. And once they have their roles, the awareness of their roles, maybe then we can go into capacity building training. So thank you.
Okay.
And I think it's really important to carve time to get to know the community you're going into. What I said a while ago in my presentation is the circle of trust really is important when you're trying to build something for the community and you're trying to build something with the community. Like we what I can I'm not a technical person, but what I can definitely tell you is we might be in a very technical room right now, but we're all humans. So the communication is the key. Once people understand what you want them to understand, I think it will be easier to kind of like converse with one another.
Thank you. I just received one more question through the app, but this is a bit tricky. I'll just read out these questions. In what ways community can control their storytelling and narrative or amplify their voices in the shrinking democracy and freedom of speech context? I take note of this question, but this may not be a proper venue to publicly discuss this, to answer this question. So we can, I don't know who made this the questions, but please reach out to me and we can have a separate discussion on this question. Okay. All right. As we are now running almost out of time, thank you for the very excellent questions and thoughtful contributions from the audience. We are now approaching the end of our allotted time. So as we conclude, let me briefly recap what we have discussed today. Natalie IEA reminded us that meaningful participation requires a deliberate design and practical framework. We will soon see the IEA's the publications on toolkit. The Chardonnay demonstrated how participation can be institutionalized through the governance and accountability mechanism. Bien also highlighted the critical role of communication and trust in enabling communities to engage meaningfully. And Sadaf challenged us to think beyond participation and consider what it truly means to share influence and decision making. Together, these perspectives suggest that the community-centered energy planning is not a one-time activity or the consultation event. It is a continuous process of listening, learning, collaborating, and building trust. On behalf of the Asian Development Bank and the Asia Clean Energy Forum, I'd like to sincerely thank our distinguished speakers and all of you for joining us today. Please join me in giving our panelists a warm round of applause. It is very obvious that the question is no longer whether communities should participate in energy transitions. The more important question is how we create the conditions for communities to genuinely influence the decisions that shape their futures. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the ASF. Thank you so much. Thank you.